You're a disgrace. Put on an apron and stay out of the family photos." My dad said beside the steam trays at my grandmother's memorial lunch, the lids rattling under the heat lamps. I looked at the stack of white plates. I set my phone face down. I stepped back without answering. "Stay with me to the end, and you'll see why I didn't need to answer him there. And tell me which city you're watching from." The hall smelled like cardamom tea and bleach. One chair at the front table was empty because it had been hers. Her scarf was still folded over the back, as if she had only gone to the kitchen and would come back, annoyed that the rice was drying out. The chandeliers were still on full, too bright for grief, each crystal catching the steam that lifted from the buffet in slow white ribbons. On the far wall, a strip of gold wedding trim had been missed when the staff changed the room over. It glinted above the condolence flowers. A child dragged a patent leather shoe across the parquet. Someone laughed too loudly, then lowered it into a cough. 3 days earlier, I had watched the coffin disappear behind a beige curtain at the crematorium. The curtain stuck for half a second at the bottom before it closed. I remember that more clearly than the prayers. My father had stood beside me with dry eyes and a firm jaw, already asking the caterer about head count before we reached the car. "People will come straight to the hall," he said, checking his watch. "Make sure the tea urns are full." I had carried the floral cards on my lap all the way back. One of them shed white petals onto my black trousers. Now he moved through the room collecting sympathy with one hand and signatures with the other. My aunt kept her eyes on the tablecloth. My brother adjusted his tie and looked past me, as if there was something urgent in the mirrored panel behind my shoulder. Then my father slid a thin folder across the dessert station and told me to sign before the relatives left. I took the folder, but not the pen. A butter knife sat beside an untouched sheet cake with my grandmother's name iced in blue. The frosting had started to sweat. A single sugared violet had slipped sideways near the corner. My father tapped the folder once with his index finger. "Not impatient, certain. It's routine," he said. "Then it can wait." He gave me a small smile meant only for damage. "You're very brave when there's no actual work in front of you." A cousin came up just then to offer condolences. My father turned his face toward her and softened it in one smooth movement. He touched his chest. He thanked her husband for coming. He accepted a hand squeeze. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Family has to pull together now. Some of us understand that." The cousin glanced at me, then at the folder, then away. That was how most things happened around him. People saw. Then they chose a safer direction for their eyes. I opened the cover just enough to see blocks of print and signature lines. My name was typed neatly on 2 pages. There was a paper clip holding something thicker underneath. No title on top, no explanation. Just a yellow sticky note in my father's handwriting. "Sign all, today." Behind us, the serving staff lifted metal lids and a burst of cumin and lamb rolled into the room. My grandmother had trained half of them herself. Even at funerals, she wanted the food hot. I could still see her at the pass window, sleeves pushed up, checking the shine on spoons with a dish towel thrown over one shoulder. She hated fingerprints on silver. She would have hated this scene too. Not the crowd, the transaction. "Why now?" I asked. My father kept his voice low. "Because your grandmother is gone, and this family does not have the luxury of your moods." That word again, family. He used it like a lock. My brother came over with a tray of tea glasses and set it down too hard. One spoon jumped and rang against the saucer. "Just sign it," he said. "Don't make today about you." I looked at him. He kept straightening the cuff of his shirt as he spoke, tugging it down, then up again. He always did that when he was nervous, but he held my father's line all the same. "Have you signed it?" I asked. He picked up a glass of tea. "That's not the point." That answered enough. A line of mourners pressed in near the front table. Women in dark coats kissed my aunt on both cheeks. An old man from the mosque stood under the chandelier and told anyone listening that my grandmother had fed half the neighborhood from this hall after the flood in '98. I watched my father nod with humble eyes, receiving the story as if generosity could transfer by blood. Then he turned back to me. "Apron," he said. "Now, and after that, the office." There it was. Not grief. Sequence, humiliate, isolate, sign. Something old in me still wanted to obey him just to stop the scene. That was the part I hated most. Not fear exactly, training. My body knew the route before my mind did. Step aside, make useful hands. Keep the temperature down. Earn your place back quietly. I had done versions of that since I was tall enough to carry chair sashes. Instead, I picked up the folder and moved toward the side corridor. No one stopped me. That was almost worse. The corridor beside the kitchen was dimmer than the hall. One of the wall sconces had burned out, so the carpet ran from gold to shadow in uneven strips. A bus tub sat on the floor with 3 lipstick-marked cups in it. Through the swinging kitchen door, I heard oil snapping and someone calling for more coriander. I leaned against the wall and finally looked down at the first page properly. Personal guarantee. I did not read further. My fingers went cold anyway. A soft step came behind me. I thought it would be my father. I closed the folder halfway before turning, like a child caught doing something forbidden. It was my aunt. She did not ask to see the papers. She did not say my name. She just came close enough that I caught the smell of rose hand cream and the starch from her black sleeve. Her eyes stayed on the corridor, not on me. That was how privacy worked in our family when it worked at all. Never directly, never long. She brushed my sleeve as if fixing lint and pressed a business card into my palm. Small black letters. Mrs. Vale, solicitor. On the back, in my aunt's cramped handwriting, were 5 words. Do not sign anything today. I looked up. My aunt had already taken half a step back. From the hall, my father's voice carried above the clink of plates. He was calling for me now. Not loudly, but in the tone he used when he expected walls to help him. I closed my hand around the card. Then I walked back into the light with the folder still unsigned. I kept the card in my pocket all through the rest of the memorial lunch. It sat there like a second pulse. Every time I moved, I felt the edge of it against my thigh. My father called for more tea. My brother carried platters to the front. An elderly neighbor held my hand too long and told me my grandmother used to save the crispiest pastry corner for me when I was small. I nodded at the right places. I cleared cups. I stayed out of the family photos. I did not sign. Twice my father tried to corner me, once near the coat rack, once by the service lift. Both times I said, later. The second time he held out the pen without speaking. Black lacquer, gold clip. The same pen he used for supplier contracts and condolence books. I looked at it, then at him, and let the silence make him put it away. When the last tray was scraped down and the chandeliers finally went dark 1 row at a time, I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and my aunt's card in the queue folder. I still had not read the full papers. I knew enough from the first line. Personal guarantee. My name beneath it. A trap dressed in office language. I put the folder on my kitchen counter and stood there for a long time without taking off my coat. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, a bottle rolled along the curb and stopped. I turned the business card over again under the light above the sink. Do not sign anything today. Not never. Today. That difference kept me awake. By morning, the city had gone the color of dishwater. I parked behind a pharmacy on a side street where delivery vans blocked half the lane. The chemist's green cross blinked in the window below. I climbed a narrow staircase that smelled like dust and eucalyptus and old carpet glue. Halfway up, I almost turned around. Not because I thought the card was fake, because I could already feel what it would cost to know something my father did not control. A brass plate on the landing read Vale and Henshaw solicitors. The letters were worn thin where fingers had polished them over the years. Inside, the office was smaller than I expected. A reception desk, a dying fern, Venetian blinds trembling every time a bus passed on the road below. Somewhere behind a closed door, a printer clicked and paused. Clicked and paused. Mrs. Vale came out herself. She was in her 60s, I guessed, with silver hair pinned back so tightly it changed the shape of her face. She did not offer the soft eyes people had been giving me since the funeral. She offered her hand. I'm sorry for your loss. She said, come in. Her room had one window facing a brick wall. A glass paperweight held down a stack of forms. There was no framed landscape, no law books arranged for effect. Just files, a radiator ticking faintly, and a blue mug with 2 pens in it. She waited until I sat, then set a sealed envelope and a leather file in front of me. The envelope had my name written in my grandmother's hand. My mouth went dry before anyone had said anything useful. Mrs. Vale folded her hands. Your grandmother established a trust some years ago. Current value is just over $1 million. The traffic outside seemed to stop for a second. Then it came back all at once. I looked at the leather file, then at her. For who? For you? The answer landed too cleanly. No room to soften against it. She named you sole primary beneficiary. Your father was never informed. I heard myself ask the smallest part first. Never, never, she said. That was intentional. The blinds shivered with another truck passing below. A strip of light moved across the desk and cut through the seal on the envelope. I thought of my father at the dessert station, tapping the folder with one finger. Sign all, today. I thought of my aunt not meeting my eyes when she put the card in my hand. Mrs. Vale opened the file and turned it toward me. Typed pages, tabs, dates. Her voice stayed level, almost gentle, because it refused drama. The trust is discretionary, with scheduled distribution options beginning immediately. You may draw from it in stages. You may not assign it, pledge it, or use it as security against third-party debt. She glanced up once to make sure I was following. That includes any debt related to your father's business. So my grandmother had seen that too. I sat back without meaning to. The chair gave a small squeak against the floor. If anyone pressures you, Mrs. Vale said, the trustee has authority to freeze distributions until we are satisfied. There is no coercion. I gave a short laugh then. Not because anything was funny. Because the sentence was so exact, it felt like someone had installed a lock on a door I had not known existed. Mrs. Vale turned one more page. There is also a handwritten clause, your grandmother added later. It permits a limited hardship release if you choose to assist a blood relative in leaving an unsafe dependency without seeking family permission. She said it as if she were reading a weather notice. No emphasis, no speculation, but the word unsafe stayed in the room after she had moved on. I looked at her properly then. What did she think was unsafe? Mrs. Vale's expression barely changed. Your grandmother did not waste language. That was not an answer. It was closer to one than I was used to getting. She slid the sealed envelope toward me. You should read this here. The paper gave softly under my thumb when I broke the seal. There was a faint trace of my grandmother's perfume in it. Not much. Just enough to move the room. Powder and orange blossom. The smell from her wardrobe when I used to hide in it as a child during family parties, pressing my face into winter coats while music shook the hangers. The letter was dated 6 months before her death. My dear one, if this has reached you late, then I was right to be careful. I stopped there, looked out the window, brick wall, fire escape, a pigeon balancing on one foot. Then I kept reading. She wrote in the same compact script she used for recipe corrections and shopping lists. No wasted loops, no shaky lines. She wrote that my father would confuse sacrifice with love and urgency with truth. She wrote that a family business can become a stage where one person's fear wears everyone else's face. She wrote that I had spent too many years being useful in rooms where usefulness was the price of peace. Then one line sat still on the page and would not let me pass. Wait before you rescue anyone. I read it twice. Maybe 3 times. My grandmother knew me too well. That was the first cut. The second was that she had planned around it. When did she do this? I asked. The initial settlement, Mrs. Vale checked a tab. Years ago, she adjusted it more than once. Why not tell me herself? She tried to tell people many things directly. Mrs. Vale closed one side of the file with 2 fingers. She had a realistic view of who listened. I folded the letter back along the old crease. My hands were steady. That bothered me. I had always imagined life-changing news would announce itself in the body. A tremor, a rush, some visible break. Instead, I just sat in a cramped office above a chemist while traffic shook the blinds, feeling a new shape appear around my life: money, distance, choice, and danger. If my father learned about it, he would not hear inheritance. He would hear access. Who else knows? I asked your aunt myself, the trustee. She paused. Now you. I looked at the file again. The amount still did not feel real. $1 million belonged in other families. Families with summer houses and polished names, not ours. Ours kept ledgers and drawers that smelled of cumin and toner. Ours turned wedding deposits into emergency repairs and called it resilience. I slipped the letter back into the envelope. I want no one in my family to know. Mrs. Vale nodded once. No surprise. As if that answer had been waiting in the room before I arrived. Not yet, I said. That was the truth of it. Not forever. Just not while my father was still arranging everyone like furniture. Mrs. Vale wrote something on a yellow legal pad. Then you will need to be careful from this point forward. I thought of the unsigned folder still on my counter. I thought of my father's face when I had not taken the pen. Yesterday had looked like humiliation. This morning changed the proportions. The insult beside the steam trays had not been random. It had been timing, pressure, a hand reaching for something before another hand could get there first. For the first time in my life, I could feel a choice forming that he had not written for me. And I still did not know how much he already suspected. I left Mrs. Vale's office with the letter in my inside pocket and the city sounding sharper than it had an hour earlier. A bus hissed at the curb. Someone in the pharmacy below argued over a prescription. A man in paint-stained trousers lit a cigarette under the stair rail and looked through me. I stood on the pavement with the leather file's weight still ghosting in my hands, though Mrs. Vale had kept the originals. She had given me copies, summary pages, contact numbers, a plain folder with my name typed on the tab. I put it in the boot under an old emergency blanket. Then I drove back to the hall. The wedding hall sat above the row of shops like it always had, two dressed up for the street beneath it. Pharmacy, tailor, closed, travel agency with faded posters in the window. Pawn shop with its metal grill half down. Our sign still had two bulbs out in the first word. In daylight, the building looked more tired than grand. The white columns by the entrance had hairline cracks running through the paint. Someone had wiped down the front glass badly, leaving streaks that caught the sun. Inside, the lunch crowd was gone. The memorial flowers had already been moved from the foyer to the sidewall. Business had resumed its usual face. A delivery of soft drinks waited by the dumbwaiter. Somewhere upstairs, a vacuum cleaner dragged over carpet. The hall never liked to hold one kind of event for long. Grief out, booking in, polish the brass, reset the chairs. I took my father's folder from the office credenza where I had hidden it after the memorial and carried it into the booking office. That room had no proper window, just a pane of wired glass looking onto the corridor. The smell in there was paper dust, stale coffee, and the lemon spray my grandmother used to wipe the desk each night. Her old adding machine still sat on the shelf, unplugged, a strip of paper hanging from it like a tongue. I closed the door and finally read what my father had put in front of me. It was not memorial expenses, not temporary help with suppliers, not anything a decent man would have summarized out loud before asking his child to sign in public. The first document was a personal guarantee tied to the banquet hall's refinancing. If the business defaulted, I would be personally liable within the stated limits, though the language made those limits look more decorative than real. The second was a quick claim on any future interest I might have in my grandmother's townhouse. I read that page twice. Her townhouse, the one with the fig tree in the back lane and the blue tile steps she scrubbed every Friday. My father wanted my future share gone before probate had even settled its breathing. The photocopies were warm from the office printer. That detail stopped me more than the legal wording. He had printed these recently, probably that morning. Maybe while people were carrying condolence trays through the hall. Maybe while my grandmother's scarf was still on the chair downstairs. There were annotations in his handwriting. Sign here. Initial here. Expedite. No mention of independent advice. No note saying take time. No explanation of why my name, and not my brother's, sat where the trap closed. I looked up at the wall calendar. 3 wedding dates had been crossed out in red this month. A fourth had a question mark beside it. Under the calendar, a booking ledger lay open to a page of deposits, balances, menu choices, and notes about stage lighting, routine details, gold chair covers, no walnuts, bride wants separate entrance. The hall had always hidden its panic inside handwriting. The door opened without a knock. My father came in carrying his phone and a ring of keys. He took in the papers on the desk, my face, the closed door. He did not look surprised, only mildly inconvenienced, as if he had walked in on a staff member checking the till. You found time, he said. I kept one hand on the folder. You said it was routine. It is. I touched the guarantee page. Routine for who? He stepped closer and leaned one shoulder against the filing cabinet. Above him hung a framed photo from a wedding 10 years earlier. Bride and groom cutting cake under those same chandeliers, both of them smiling toward a future that, for all I knew, never arrived. My father had left the photo there because the centerpieces were expensive and the room looked full. The business is having a temporary squeeze, he said. Banks get nervous. They want continuity on paper. Then why is my name on debt I never agreed to? His jaw shifted once. He hated being asked the first question after he had prepared for the second. Because family moves as one body, he said. Because this hall fed you. Because when times are tight, people with a stake act like they have one. I looked at the quick, and this, a technicality, on Grandma's house? He took the page from my hand, glanced at it, and set it back down flat. You're reading with the appetite of someone who has never had to keep anything alive. The old instinct came then. Lower your tone. Make it easier. Ask better. Ask smaller. I felt it moving up my spine like muscle memory. He had built most of our conversations on that reflex. If he pressed hard enough, I would switch from question to repair. But Mrs. Vale's voice was still in my head. You may not assign it. You may not pledge it. If anyone pressures you, I said, why didn't you ask me in private? I did ask you in private. You chose theater at a memorial lunch. He smiled without warmth. You're very attached to the performance of innocence. That made me look at him differently. Not as a man in a squeeze. As a man arranging a scene. The public insult. The urgency. The pen. The folder. He had wanted me off balance. Ashamed. Quick. He had picked a room where saying no would look like disloyalty to the dead. I asked, how bad is it? His eyes narrowed. Temporary. That's not a number. He tapped the desk with 2 fingers. Careful? With what? With assuming your name is worth enough to bargain from this position. There it was. Clean enough to hear. He leaned in just slightly and said, you should be grateful anyone still trusts your name at all. Not loud, not theatrical, just precise. Like a man aligning cutlery before guests arrived. For a second I was 12 again, standing in the dish room after breaking a stack of side plates, waiting for the sentence that would tell me what I was worth that day. Useful, expensive, clumsy, embarrassing. He had always spoken value in household terms. I picked up the papers and squared them against the desk edge. I'm not signing this. Not today, he said. It was not a question. He thought time still belonged to him. He left before I answered, keys in one hand, phone already at his ear. By the time the door shut, he was speaking to someone about chair repairs and linen counts. His voice smooth again, as if legal coercion were just another item before lunch service. I stayed in the booking office until the vacuum stopped and the corridor quieted. Then I made copies of everything. 1 set for my flat, 1 set folded into a brown envelope. I slid behind the old adding machine. My hands moved fast, my breathing did not. All afternoon, I watched the hall more closely than I ever had before. The pastry freezer had a handwritten note on it, do not overload. The florist called twice about an overdue balance. A supplier stood in the foyer too long speaking to my father in low tones, then left without his usual joke. My brother spent 20 minutes reworking the table plan for a wedding that had not confirmed final numbers. Every detail felt ordinary until it didn't. By evening, the sky over the alley had gone the color of tin. I sat in my car behind the hall with the engine off, reading the quitclaim again under the dome light. Kitchen staff dragged black trash bags to the bins. 1 split on the pavement and leaked wilted coriander, foil trays, and tea bags black with milk. The back door slammed. Someone cursed softly in Arabic. Grease and soap drifted through the cracked window. There was a knock on the passenger side glass. Leila stood there in her school jumper under an oversized coat, her hair tied back badly, as if she had done it while walking. She looked over her shoulder before getting in. Not frightened exactly, careful. She shut the door and kept her bag on her lap. The utility company called twice, she said. Dad told everyone not to mention it to you. I folded the papers and put them between the seats. Why would they mention it to me? She looked at the black bags by the bins. Because you notice things. That was the closest thing to praise anyone in the family had offered me in a while. I waited. She picked at a loose thread on her cuff. He said, if anyone asks, there was a billing error. Was there? She gave a small shrug. There's always a billing error when he says there is. A cook came out for a smoke and glanced toward the car, then away. In the rearview mirror, the hall windows glowed amber above the alley. Beautiful from a distance. Like they were still holding weddings instead of debts. Leila turned to me then. Her voice dropped so low I barely heard it over the idling van near the bins. Did you sign? I looked at her hands. No rings. Ink on 1 finger. Nail bitten to the quick on her thumb. She was not asking out of curiosity. She was asking like someone standing at the edge of a frozen pond, waiting to see if the first step held. No, I said. She let out 1 breath through her nose. Not relief exactly. More like a measurement confirmed. Then she nodded once, looking straight ahead, and I understood something I had not let myself name. She was watching me to learn whether leaving was possible. For the next 2 days, my father did not mention the papers. That was unusual enough to become its own pressure. He moved through the hall as if nothing had shifted. He checked floral invoices. He took calls near the stairs with his back half turned. He told a bride's uncle the stage lights would be replaced by Friday and smiled as though electrical work happened by charm. My brother kept talking about chair deliveries and staffing gaps in a voice that tried too hard to sound normal. Leila stayed quieter than before. Once I caught her standing in the upstairs corridor outside the office, listening without making it look like listening. I kept waiting for the next push. It came 2 nights later, after a small engagement party. The room had been done in pale peach and silver. By 11, the balloons had started sinking toward the carpet. The cleaners were stacking chairs upside down on the side tables. Someone had left a lipstick mark on the rim of a water goblet at table 12. I was coiling extension cords near the DJ booth when my father said, without looking at me, "Stay after they leave." Just that. The staff drifted out one by one. The vacuum cords were reeled in. The floor mop squeaked in the corridor. A cleaner switched off the chandeliers in sections, and the hall dropped into a softer dark until only the bar lights were left on, blue and amber under the mirrored shelves. The room looked less like a business then, more like a stage after the audience had gone home. The kind of silence that made every scrape sound planned. My father was behind the bar when I walked over. He had taken off his jacket and rolled his sleeves once. Not twice. The measured version of tired, on the counter. Beside him sat my grandmother's porcelain cup, white with a green vine painted around the rim and one small chip near the handle. He never used it when she was alive. He said it was too delicate for daily service. She used it every afternoon anyway. Now he poured tea into it and set it in front of me. The chipped rim faced me like an instruction. "Sit," he said. I sat on one of the bar stools. The leather was cracked along the edge. Somewhere in the kitchen, a fridge motor hummed and stopped. He poured tea for himself in a plain glass, not the cup. "We've both been under strain," he said. I may have spoken harshly. The apology was shaped correctly. That was the dangerous part. He had the words. He just only used them when something else needed oiling. I wrapped my fingers around the porcelain anyway. It was warmer than I expected. He watched me take that in. "Your grandmother thought highly of you," he said. It was almost enough to make me laugh. He had spent years translating her praise into instructions, and now he was borrowing it back from the dead. Still, some old part of me leaned toward the sound of it, not trust. Recognition. Even a counterfeit version can reach for the right nerve. He lowered his voice. "You are smart. Smarter than your brother in some ways." That was not a kindness either. It was a wedge, but I had been waiting to hear anything like it since childhood. Smart, capable, needed. I hated how quickly my body reacted. Shoulders loosening a fraction, breathing easier, as if praise, even latent purchased, could still enter like medicine. He kept going. "This business needs fresh hands. Real systems, someone who sees where things get wasted." He gestured toward the dark hall. "Your grandmother understood that. She always said you noticed details." I looked at the rows of empty tables, at the silver confetti caught in the carpet seams, at the bar mirror reflecting us back in fractured strips. And I can make this formal." He set his glass down carefully. "Operations manager, salary authority, you come in properly, not as a child helping out, as family taking its place." There it was, the version I had built and rebuilt in my head for years without admitting it. Not love exactly. Appointment. A chair at the table. A title instead of a task. My father leaned one elbow on the counter. "We fixed the bank issue. We stabilized the season. Then we move forward." "The bank issue?" I said, "meaning I sign." He gave a small shrug. "Meaning you stop embarrassing me in front of relatives and help." From the kitchen, the ice machine kicked on with a hard clunk, then dropped a cascade of cubes into the metal bin. The sound carried through the dark hall and fell flat between us. He let the silence do some of the work. He was good at that. He knew when to stop speaking and let hope supply the rest. I drank the tea, too sweet. A skin had already formed on top. "I thought I was a disgrace," I said. His face did not change much. I was angry. That's a broad category. He ignored that. People say things under pressure. Meaning he expected me to understand the violence of his language as whether, meaning his words were accidents, while mine would be choices. The side door opened and my brother came in carrying a stack of glass racks from the wash station. He stopped when he saw us, then smiled in that careful way people do when entering a room already arranged around a purpose. "Still here," he said, setting the racks down. "Dad said, we're talking about next steps." My brother wiped his hands on a bar towel and leaned against the far end of the counter. "Good, no surprise." So this had been prepared too. He looked at me. "Everybody grows up eventually." I said nothing. He went on, "You can't keep hovering outside and acting like none of this is yours. It is yours. Either you step in or you stop pretending you care what happens." There was brotherly concern in the phrasing, mild disappointment. Beneath it sat relief. If I signed, he would not have to ask why his own name was absent from those papers. My father picked up the thread before the room cooled. "You want respect? Fine. Earn it in the open." I watched his hand on the tea glass. Thick fingers. Gold wedding band polished by years of use. He tapped the base once against the wood. The same hand that had shoved the folder at me beside my grandmother's memorial cake. The same voice that now moved low and careful, as if volume had been the only problem. For half an hour, they gave me a version of family cooperation, polished just enough to pass in dim light. Salary figures were mentioned, vaguely, a title, improved booking systems, new supplier terms. Your grandmother would have wanted continuity. My father said, "This place should stay in the family." That line almost moved me. Not because it was true, because I wanted it to be. I could see it for a second, my grandmother's hall still open. The staff paid, Leila safer. My father older and softer at last because crisis had forced him into honesty. It was a good picture, the kind you step into before checking the floorboards. Then my father slid the bank papers from under the till drawer. He had brought them to the bar before I even sat down. No revised terms. No roll letter. No contract naming salary or authority. Just the same signature lines waiting in a new pool of light. "Take them home if you like," he said. "But this can't drift." The chill in the room returned so fast it felt mechanical. I set the teacup down on its saucer. The chip clicked once against the porcelain. "I'll think about it," I said. My father's mouth tightened, then smoothed. "Don't take too long." My brother gathered the glass racks again. Conversation over now that the answer had not arrived on schedule. As he passed me, he said quietly, "At some point, hesitation becomes a choice too." When I got home, the flat smelled faintly of radiator heat and wet wool. I took off my coat, put the bank papers on the table unopened, and went straight to the kitchen drawer where I had hidden Mrs. Vale's envelope beneath old takeaway menus and spare batteries. The second letter was thinner than the first. I boiled the kettle while I opened it. Steam started before the water rolled. The window above the sink was black with my reflection. My grandmother's writing looked steadier in this letter, as if she had been less tired that day. "He will sound kind when the wall is close enough for him to feel it on his back." I stood still. Kindness offered at a deadline is not kindness. The kettle clicked off. I did not move. I read the lines again, then set the letter beside the sink and watched the steam whiten the window until my own face disappeared. In the other room, my father's papers waited on the table, neat and patient. For the first time, his softer voice did not confuse me. It only told me how near the wall really was. I got to the hall before the prep cooks. The shutters on the shops below were still half down. A man from the bakery next door was hosing yesterday's sugar and cigarette ends into the gutter. Upstairs, the corridor lights buzzed awake one by one as I unlocked the side entrance. The building always sounded older before service began. Pipes clicking, fridge motors settling. A distant fan turning somewhere it should have been replaced years ago. The office door was unlocked. That alone told me my father had slept badly or left in a hurry. He locked that drawer when he remembered himself. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and frying onions rising from the kitchen below. On the wall, the booking calendar still showed those 3 wedding dates crossed out in red, like small wounds no one had bandaged. A blue blazer hung over the back of my father's chair. His reading glasses sat folded on top of a supplier statement. An empty teacup left a pale ring on the desk blotter. I stood there for a second with my hand on the drawer pull, listening to the building. Then I opened it. Seating charts first, folded and clipped. Bridal table at the center. Uncle refuses to sit near cousin. Move speaker away from pillar. Beneath those, liquor invoices, linen orders, a booklet from the bank. My father liked to bury the dangerous things under the routine ones. It made them feel deserved. At the back of the drawer, beneath a stack of old menu proofs, I found 3 envelopes from Mrs. Vale. My name was on all of them. The sight of my own name in that office, in her handwriting, made the room narrow. I took them out one by one and laid them on the desk. The paper had yellowed slightly at the corners. Each envelope carried a red stamp. Return to sender. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, neat and hard-pressed, was one short lie. Not at this address. I read that line 3 times. I had lived in the same flat for almost 4 years. Before that, I had lived in my grandmother's townhouse for 18 months after university. Before that, this hall had known where to find me better than any place in the city. My father had not misplaced these. He had intercepted them, corrected them, sent them back. One envelope had been sliced open and taped shut again with cloudy office tape gone brittle at the edges. I held it up to the light. The cut was careful, not anger. Inspection. I opened that one first. Inside was a formal notice dated the week I turned 20. It advised me of the trust's existence and requested that I contact Mrs. Vale to confirm identity documents and updated beneficiary instructions. There was a line near the bottom about staged access beginning that year, unless delayed by communication failure. Communication failure. My father had reduced theft to an administrative problem. The second envelope held a meeting request sent after my grandmother's first hospital admission. I remembered that admission. The smell of hand sanitizer and boiled vegetables. My grandmother snapping at the nurse because someone had overcooked the rice. My father telling everyone it was just observation while calling the insurance broker from the stairwell. The letter asked me to attend privately if possible. Privately. I looked toward the door then, half expecting him to appear in it, already rehearsed. But the corridor stayed empty. Downstairs, someone dropped a tray and swore softly. Oil hissed in a pan. Morning went on. The third envelope was unopened. Dated only 2 months ago. Another request to make contact regarding confidential testamentary arrangements. Same return mark. Same handwriting across the front. Not at this address. He did not just keep a secret from me, he stood in front of it and sent it back. I sat down in his chair without meaning to. The leather gave under me in a way that felt wrong. On the desk was a pad with his notes from last week's supplier calls. Delay payment. Offer push to season end. On the top corner he had written my name once, then crossed it out hard enough to score the paper. For a minute I just looked at the 3 envelopes lined on the desk, feeling something colder than anger settle into place. Pressure, I understood. Panic, I could almost understand. This was older. This had patience in it. I checked the rest of the drawer. There were no more letters, but there were copies of probate forms, a valuation printout for my grandmother's townhouse, and a yellow sticky note attached to a bank brochure. Must secure signatures before quarter end. The handwriting was his. The timing sat there in plain view. Memorial lunch. Bank papers. Apology at the bar. None of it had started with grief. Grief had simply made a better opening. I put the envelopes inside my jacket and walked out to the fire escape at the end of the corridor. The metal steps were damp from the morning mist. From there I could see the backs of the shops below. The pharmacy's delivery crates. The tailor's vent breathing steam. A pigeon pecking at a torn nan in the alley. The city looked ordinary enough to trust and made it easier to dial. Mrs. Vale answered on the second ring. It's me, I said. A pause. Then, are you alone? Yes. I told her what I had found. The 3 envelopes, the return markings, the opened one taped shut. I kept my voice even because if I let it slip, something uglier would come through. Not noise. Something final. When I finished, I heard papers being moved on her end. A file opened. Her chair creaked. We suspected interference. She said, you suspected my father was taking my mail. We suspected any direct correspondence sent through family channels might not reach you. That sounds cleaner than what happened. It is cleaner than what happened, she said, but not different. A bus passed on the street below and shook the fire escape under my shoes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. We attempted to, then her voice softened only by a degree. Your grandmother changed delivery instructions after the second return. She added, your aunt as a silent witness in case there was ever a challenge to intent. I looked down through the metal grating at the alley. The prep cook below carried in 2 sacks of rice, one on each shoulder, head down against the weight. I thought of my aunt at the memorial lunch, not looking at me when she put the card in my hand. She had already known enough to choose a side in silence. Mrs. Vale kept speaking. Your grandmother anticipated resistance from your father if he became aware of the trust before her death. Because of the business. In part, there was something in those 2 words that made me grip the rail. In part, how I heard another file being turned. The trust seed money came from the sale of your grandmother's first tailoring shop. I said nothing. The alley noise seemed to recede. My father had always told that story one way. The little shop failed. Your grandmother lost everything the first time. That was why she pushed so hard later. That was why cash had to be watched. That was why risk was shameful. I had heard that version so many times it had settled into the family like furniture. Mrs. Vale said, it did not fail. The words landed with almost no sound. She sold it privately after your mother died. Mrs. Vale continued. The proceeds were placed and built over time. Your grandmother was deliberate. The trust grew in stages over years. My father almost never used her name in money conversations. He kept her in photographs and hospital memories, not ledgers. As if grief and finance occupied separate rooms. As if she had vanished from the practical map of the family the day she was buried. I stared at the rust spot on the fire escape rail until it blurred. He told us it failed. I said, yes, just that. No comfort added, no legal padding. I could see my grandmother now in that first shop only from scraps. Measuring chalk tucked behind one ear. Bent over a hem, my mother younger, maybe, carrying tea in paper cups. I had never been given the full picture. My father had cut those years down to a cautionary tale and kept the real foundation for himself. What else did he know? I asked. That, Mrs. Vale said, is the question you should start asking everywhere. A kitchen worker pushed open the back door below, and the smell of onions rose stronger through the damp air. Morning service was starting. Orders, deliveries, receipts, all the ordinary machinery of the place my father used to explain our life to us. I put the phone in my pocket and stood there a moment longer. Then I looked back through the wired glass toward his office. The drawer, the desk, the crossed-out dates, the blazer over the chair. I stopped treating the present crisis as new. It had been arranged for years. That question followed me for the rest of the day. What else did he know? I left the fire escape, went back through the booking office, and put everything exactly where I had found it except the envelopes. Seating charts back on top. Liquor invoices squared. Drawer shut, the ordinary mess restored. Downstairs, the prep cooks were laying trays of marinated chicken on the stainless counters. The smell of yogurt and garlic sat thick in the corridor. My father had not arrived yet. I was glad for that. I did not trust my face to stay neutral if he looked at me too closely. By noon, I was at a bank across town where no one knew our family name. The branch was small and over-air-conditioned. A bowl of wrapped toffee sat on the counter beside a fake orchid with dust in the petals. I opened a private account with a young advisor who kept calling me sir, even though he looked younger than Leila's chemistry tutor. I used my own address, my own phone. No shared contacts. No old numbers my father might know through habit alone. Every box I ticked felt both practical and disloyal, which told me how badly I had been trained. When it was done, I stepped outside and checked the street twice before calling Mrs. Vale's office. Her assistant answered, a brisk woman named June, whose voice sounded like she had no patience for family drama disguised as legal urgency. I need somewhere to put documents. I said, not a friend's house. She said at once, no, not your car. No. There was a pause. Keyboard clicks. Then she gave me the name of a storage place near the freight yards and suggested, I rent it under a plain trading name. Use something boring, she said. Boring survives inspection. An hour later, I signed for a narrow unit under the name Alder Catering Supplies. The place smelled like wet concrete and cardboard. Fluorescent strips buzzed over rows of metal doors. A man in a high-waist vest showed me how the padlock worked, chewing mint gum the whole time. The unit was barely larger than a wardrobe. Enough for boxers, enough for distance. I went back to my flat and packed in stages, which made it feel less like leaving and more like filing. Copies of the deed papers, Mrs. Vale's letters, my passport, tax records, a spare phone charger, my grandmother's recipe books, the ones with grease marks on the lamb pages, and a brown ring from a teacup on the lentil soup recipe. I hesitated over those. They were not legally important. They were simply the kind of thing people lost when a house changed shape around them. I put everything into 2 plastic bins with snap lids and drove them straight back to the storage unit before I could decide I was overreacting. The bins looked small on the concrete floor. That unsettled me. Years of family history, one possible future, 2 plastic boxers beneath a humming light. I locked the unit and stood there longer than necessary, listening to distant traffic through the building walls. My grandmother had built $1 million quietly from the sale of a tailor's shop my father had called a failure. I was still adjusting to that fact when my phone lit up. Leila? Just my name on her screen. No message, I answered. Where are you? Can you meet me? She asked. Her voice was level. Too level. Now? Yes. Are you at home a beat? Not exactly. We met at a 24-hour laundromat on the edge of a supermarket car park. It was one of those places with a flickering open sign and windows clouded from dryer heat. Inside, fluorescent lights made everyone look a little unwell. The air smelled of detergent, hot lint, and the faint metallic temps of wet coins. 2 machines along the back wall thumped out of rhythm. A woman in scrubs sat by the folding table watching a spin cycle with both hands wrapped around a paper cup. Leila was standing by the detergent shelf when I came in. She had one of my grandmother's scarves wrapped around her hair against the drizzle. Cream fabric printed with small green leaves. I knew the scarf well. My grandmother wore it when she balanced the hall books at the kitchen table and refused interruptions. Seeing it on Leila tightened something in my chest. You okay? I asked. She did not answer that. She did not sit either. She stayed standing with one hand on the shelf beside the fabric softener bottles and asked, Can Dad see money that's in my name? Not, hello, not can we talk. Straight to the hinge. Depends where it is. I said, why can he not if I keep it clean? She looked at me then, just once. Measuring whether I had said yes to the right fear, I moved closer, but not too close. The dryers behind us rolled and thudded. Somewhere a timer buzzed and stopped. We were alone enough to speak, but not alone enough for the conversation to feel safe. What happened? I asked. She rubbed her thumb along the scarf edge, flattening the fold again and again. My tuition account is empty. I waited. He used it months ago. Her voice stayed low. He said he'd put it back after the wedding season. The machine beside us clicked into rinse and changed pitch. Water rushed. A child's red sock slapped against the glass in a blur. How do you know it's empty? I logged in. She swallowed. There were transfers I didn't make. How much? All of it. She said those two words without emphasis. That was how I knew she had already cried somewhere else or not at all. I leaned against the end of a folding table because standing still suddenly took more effort. Did anyone else know? She gave a short shake of her head. Maybe my brother? I don't know. Dad said not to fuss and not to mention it to you. He said it would make you dramatic. A small part of me almost smiled at that. Dramatic. My father's word for any fact that arrived before he had edited it. Why tell me now? Leila looked past me at the spinning dryer doors. Because you didn't sign. There it was again. Not just hope, data. She had been watching the same way I had started watching. Quietly storing details. Waiting to see whether refusal changed anything. I wanted to tell her I would fix it tonight. Transfer the money. Pay the fees. Move her out if she asked. I could hear the shape of those promises in my throat before I said them. They sounded clean, heroic, even useful in exactly the way my grandmother had warned me about. Wait, before you rescue anyone? The line came back with irritating accuracy. So I asked, does he know you checked? No. Does anyone know you're here? No. I looked at the windows. Rain had started needling across the glass in silver lines. Outside, trolley bays rattled in the wind. Inside, the woman in scrubs moved her laundry to a basket and left without looking at us. I said, I can help you, but only if we do this carefully. Leila's face changed very little. Still, I saw the muscles in her jaw tighten. I don't need careful, she said. I need my account back, I know. Do you? The question was fair. I had spent years being the useful sibling in public and the absent one in the rooms where decisions got hidden. She had grown up inside the house while I learned to orbit it. To her, my caution might have looked like distance, so I made myself answer plainly. I can help only if you tell me the truth as soon as you know it, I said, even when the truth makes him look bad. Especially then, she dropped her eyes to the floor tiles. Blue flecks in off-white. One cracked near her shoe. Her thumb kept smoothing the scarf edge flat. Why? She asked. Because half-truths are how he moves money. How he moves people, too. That reached her, I could tell by the stillness that followed. She nodded once without looking at me. In that small motion, with my grandmother's scarf under her hand and the humming lights above us, Leila stopped being part of the crowd around my father. She became something else. A witness from inside the house, not loud, not declared, but real. I said, can you get copies of the tuition statements? Yes. Do that first. Send them to me, not to anyone at the hall. Another nod, and if he says anything strange about accounts, bills, the house, the business, anything, tell me exactly. Not what you think it means, just what he says. She finally looked at me again. You sound like a lawyer. No, I said. I sound like someone late. That almost made her smile, but not quite. When we stepped back out into the car park, the rain had turned steady. I walked her to my car, then stopped with my hand on the passenger door. I did not ask if she wanted to come home with me. Not yet. The question itself could trigger something before we had a place to land it. She stood under the weak yellow light from the laundromat sign, scarf darkening at the edges with rain. Don't tell him we met, she said. I won't. She hesitated. Can he take more? I thought of the empty tuition account, the returned letters, the quick claim, my father's neat handwriting across envelopes that should have reached me years ago. Yes, I said. If no one stops him. She absorbed that without moving, then got into her own car and left. I stayed in the lot after her taillights vanished, listening to the rain drum on the roof. The trust had stopped being only a way out for me. Now it had a second shape, and I still had not decided whether opening that door would save us or pull me back into the fire. My father called me just after 9 the next morning and told me to be ready by 10:30. Not asked, told. We have an appointment, he said. With who? The bank. I stood in my kitchen with Leila's last message still open on my phone. A screenshot of her tuition account, balance 0.003, transfers out over 6 weeks. Reference fields blank. I looked at the number while my father waited on the line as if silence were agreement. I didn't confirm anything. I said, "You don't need to confirm. We're going." Then he hung up. He arrived in his dark sedan 10 minutes early and sat outside my building without texting. Just waited at the curb where he knew I could see the car from my window. That was one of his older habits. Presence as pressure. Let the engine idle. Make the choice visible. I took my own car instead. When I pulled into the bank lot, he was already standing by the entrance with his jacket buttoned and one hand on the glass door, as if he were receiving me into a future I had delayed. "This won't take long," he said. Inside, the air smelled like toner, carpet cleaner, and old heating vents. A teller with a neat bun glanced up, recognized my father, then dropped her eyes to her keyboard. He had been here before. More than once, I guessed. The manager came out himself and shook my father's hand before mine. "Thanks for coming in," he said to me, too quickly. His office had a glass bowl of wrapped mints on the desk and a framed photo of 2 children in school uniforms turned slightly toward the chair for visitors. The blinds were half open. Sunlight lay across the carpet in thin bars. On the credenza behind him sat a printer and a stack of forms aligned neatly to be casual. My father took the chair closest to the manager. He left me the one slightly off to the side. He started talking before we sat fully down. As I explained, "This is family support." He said, "Continuity. We're regularizing some temporary pressures." Regularizing, he loved words that made damage sound clerical. The manager nodded at the file in front of him and gave me a smile that wanted to be neutral and landed elsewhere. "Your father has outlined the structure." "He's outlined something," I said. My father ignored that. He rested one wrist on the desk and slid the guarantee toward me with a pen aligned neatly beside it. The same choreography as the memorial lunch. Better lighting, worse witnesses. "This is straightforward," he said. "Once this is signed, we can move past the noise." I did not touch the pen. I kept my hand in my lap and looked at the manager instead. "I want the full debt schedule." The manager's eyes moved to my father and then back to me. "The summary should be sufficient for the full debt schedule," I repeated. My father leaned back slightly, not enough to read his irritation unless you knew him. I knew him. "That's unnecessary," he said. "You're not auditing the business." "No," I said. "You're asking me to secure it." The room went still in the way offices do when everyone hears the real sentence at once and hopes someone else will soften it. The manager adjusted his tie. "There are standard confidentiality considerations. My name is on the guarantee." Another glance to my father. He gave the smallest shake of his head, like a man handling a child who had chosen the wrong place to test boundaries. "Print it?" I said. The manager exhaled through his nose, reached for the file, and stood. One moment. When he left, my father folded his hands and looked through the glass wall at the teller counters outside. He did not look at me. That was more deliberate than eye contact would have been. "You enjoy this part too much," he said. "What part?" "The part where you confuse resistance with intelligence." I looked at the bowl of mints. Half of them were stuck together where the wrappers had warmed and cooled too many times. "I'm asking what I'm signing." "You're asking to be difficult in front of strangers." I said nothing. He turned then and gave me the softer face again. Not warmth. Management. "You think I'm trying to hurt you?" he said. "I'm trying to keep this place standing. Your grandmother built something. You want to watch it collapse because your feelings got bruised?" There was the old move. Not greed, heritage, duty. If he draped himself in my grandmother's labor, he could make refusal look like desecration. Before I could answer, the manager returned with warm pages in his hand. He set them down between us, but not too close to me, almost as if paper itself had acquired temperature. "Current obligations," he said. I pulled the pages over and read tax arrears, supplier defaults, utilities past due, wage liabilities flagged but unresolved, a second mortgage against my grandmother's townhouse. The line sat there in black print with account numbers and dates beside it. Registered months before the memorial lunch, months before the bar tea, months before he called me continuity. My father had already staked the dead against the future before he ever asked for my help. I turned one page, then another. The amounts were larger than I expected, which meant some part of me had still been offering him mercy in the dark. Deferred VAT, catering credit lines, security interest against fixtures and equipment. The hall itself did not look elegant anymore. It looked pledged. When was this taken out? I asked, tapping the townhouse line. My father answered before the manager could. That property was underused. That wasn't the question. A family asset should serve the family. My grandmother is barely in the ground. The manager looked down at his desk, not the papers. The wood grain just beyond them. My father's mouth flattened. Watch yourself. I looked at the date again. He had done it while she was alive. Maybe while she was in hospital. Maybe while she still thought the house would pass the way houses are supposed to pass, carrying memory instead of liability. The manager cleared his throat. This refinancing would stabilize short-term exposure. For who? I asked. He did not answer. He gathered one paper edge and straightened it, though it was already straight. My father said, for all of us. I laid the pages down carefully. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my voice came out level. I will not sign anything today or any day without my own counsel. No one moved. Then the manager began collecting the documents as if they might catch fire if left exposed to air much longer. He stacked the pages, lifted the guarantee, removed the pen, set the pen aside, then pulled the whole file toward himself with both hands. That is, of course, you're right, he said. My father stood, slow, controlled, more dangerous than anger because it left no heat to measure. We're done here, he said. In the lobby, the teller pretended to be very busy with a cash drawer. Outside, the daylight felt too bright for what had just happened. Cars moved in and out of spaces. Someone was loading bottled water into a hatchback 2 rows over. A shopping trolley rolled loose at the edge of the lot and bumped a curb. My father stopped beside my car, not his. For a second I thought he might finally raise his voice. Public humiliation had always been one of his cleaner tools. But he did not shout. He stepped close enough that I could smell starch on his collar and the faint medicinal note of his aftershave. Then he spoke so low it forced me to lean closer just to hear. You have no idea what you just set in motion. He stepped back before I answered. I watched him walk to his car with the same straight shoulders he wore at funerals and weddings, whenever the room needed a version of him that looked reliable from a distance. He got in and closed the door without looking back. I stood there with my keys in my hand and heard my own refusal again, plain and uncorrected. I will not sign, not later, not after tea, not in private, not once tempers cooled. I had said it in front of a third party, on record, with paper and toner and office glass holding the shape of it. And because I knew my father, I knew this part too. He would not come at me the same way again. After the bank meeting, my father did not call for 2 days. The silence changed the hall more than shouting would have. Staff moved around him carefully. My brother became brisk in that brittle way people do when they know a plate has cracked, but keep setting the table anyway. Leila sent me 2 more screenshots from her tuition account and 1 short message. He checked my room. I told her to keep the originals somewhere outside the house. She replied with a single thumbs up, which looked too small for the sentence before it. Then the weekend arrived, and the hall filled again. By 6 on Saturday, the foyer smelled of rosewater and floor polish. Gold chair covers caught the chandelier light and made the room look richer than it was. The florist had overdone the centerpieces to please the bride's mother, so white lilies leaned over mirrored stands and dropped pollen onto the linen. A girl in silver heels ran laughing down the corridor with 2 cousins behind her, all 3 carrying safety pins and someone's lipstick. In the bridal room, steam from hair tools clouded the mirror edges. From the stage came the first test notes from the singer's keyboard. Thin and hopeful. False oxygen. That was what it felt like. Even I felt it when the chandeliers came up and the room started doing what it had been built to do. The hall knew how to flatter itself under pressure. In that light, the cracked paint by the service door disappeared. The aging carpet looked plush. The mirrors doubled the crowd and called it abundance. For an hour, maybe 2, Det had the decency to stay behind the walls. I stood near the back while the bride came in under a canopy of flowers, her veil catching on the doorframe for a second before her cousin freed it. Guests rose, phones lifted, music swelled. My father stood near the front in his dark suit, greeting people with a hand over his heart, the portrait of a man carrying legacy rather than lone covenants. Watching him there, I understood something ugly. He did not just need the business for money. He needed rooms like this to keep believing his own edits. The kitchen held a different version. By 8, the prep room was slick with heat. Trays of lamb moved in and out under foil. The dishwasher stood at the sink with his sleeves rolled high, steam wetting his hair flat against his forehead. The pastry woman was torching the tops of custards with the concentration of someone who knew distraction had a cost. Sugar syrup bubbled in one pan. Burnt rosemary smoked from another. As I stepped around a stack of plates, the dishwasher asked, "Are the rumors true?" He did not look up when he said it. He kept feeding glasses into the rack. What rumors? That the bank came. That was how news traveled here. Not in announcements. In appliance parts, supplier pauses, whispers while carrying crates. Before I could answer, the pastry woman said, "They can't freeze us before next month. I'm already owed 6 weeks." She blew out the torch and set it down. Blue flame gone. Her face stayed flat. 6 weeks, I looked at her hands. Sugar burns on 2 fingers. Wedding ring pushed up above the knuckle to keep it clean. She had worked this hall since I was a teenager. She knew every family in 3 neighborhoods by dessert preference alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She gave a small shrug. "Tell you what? That money doesn't arrive when your father says it arrived." At the pass, the head chef lifted a tray and barked for garnish. Then he saw my face and waved me over with the tongs. He had worked beside my grandmother for 20 years. They fought about salt, staffing, table timing, everything. They trusted each other in the old professional way that survives insult because the work matters more. "I stayed because of her," he said, keeping his voice low. "She promised this place would outlive all of us." He glanced toward the service door, where music from the hall slipped in each time someone pushed through. I believed her. That hurt more than I expected. Not because he blamed me, because he didn't. He was telling me where he had placed his years and whose word had carried them. I left the kitchen later with the smell of sugar syrup and burnt lamb on my coat. The bride and groom were cutting the cake under the chandeliers while guests clapped on cue. A little boy slept across 3 banquet chairs with his patent shoes still on. My father saw me near the corridor and gave me a look that tried to read whether I had softened. I hadn't, but I had become less certain in a different way. The workers were real. Their unpaid weeks were real. Leila's empty account was real. My grandmother's promise to the chef had been real too. If I walked away cleanly, those things would still break. I met Mrs. Vale after midnight in her office above the pharmacy because she was the kind of woman who answered late when the facts justified the hour. The chemist below was closed. Metal shutters down. The staircase smelled stronger of dust after rain. In her office, the radiator clicked and the blinds shifted in the draft from an old window frame that never sealed properly. I put the numbers on her desk, estimated wage backlog, utility notices, supplier balances I had copied, booking deposits still due and for 2 upcoming weddings. I had stayed after cleanup to pull them from the office while my brother was downstairs arguing with the liquor rep. "I want to use some of the trust," I said. Mrs. Vale did not react at once. She just took off her glasses and wiped them with a folded tissue. "For what purpose? To bridge payroll? Keep the doors open long enough to sort the rest out." Even as I said it, I heard the shape of my grandmother's warning. "Wait, before you rescue anyone." But the words had already crossed the desk. Mrs. Vale put her glasses back on and started writing figures in columns. Her pen moved slowly. Outside, a late bus made the blinds tremble. She asked for dates. Staff counts. Gross weekly intake on booked events. I answered what I knew and admitted what I didn't. She corrected one figure herself from a public filing she pulled up on her screen. For 10 minutes, it felt almost possible. Not easy. Not clean. But possible in the way triage can feel possible if you only look at the next hour. Cover oldest wages. Patch utilities. Stabilize 1 month. Get control of bookings. Push my father out later if needed. Save the workers first. Save the shell. Decide the rest once breathing returned. I watched that version build in neat legal pad numbers under her hand. Then she stopped, stared at one line, and reached for the phone. She called someone she knew in insolvency compliance. No names at first. Just a trading entity, a registration number, a question about remittances. Her tone stayed dry. Professional. Twice she said, "I see." Once she asked for confirmation of the period. When she hung up, she did not touch the legal pad again. "What is it?" I asked. She folded her hands. "Payroll taxes have not been remitted for almost a year." The room changed temperature without moving. "How sure are you?" "Certain enough." I looked at the columns she had written. Staff, wages, utilities, deposits. All of it seemed childish suddenly. Housekeeping around a structural crack. "If I cover payroll now, you do not cover payroll," she said. "You step into a fraud sinkhole with your name attached." The phrase was ugly. Accurate too. I sat back and looked at the brick wall outside her window, though there was nothing to see there. She went on, careful and uncertain. Any money you place into the hall under present conditions could be construed as participating in continued trading while material obligations remain concealed. Your father has not merely mismanaged cash flow, he appears to have diverted statutory funds. Appears? I am choosing a word you can survive in court. I put one hand over my mouth and felt the sugar smoke still caught in my coat sleeve. The chef, the pastry woman, the dishwasher asking if the rumors were true. They were standing on a floor that had already given way. They just had not been told where the break was. So I do nothing. I said, that is not what I said. But it was the end of one option. Cleanly, completely. When I left her office, the street below was empty except for a taxi idling under the green pharmacy cross. On the drive home, every green light felt wrong, as if the city had mistaken permission for safety. The hall had looked alive that night. That was the most dangerous thing about it. The packet arrived the next morning, no courier branding, just a thick office envelope pushed halfway through the slot in my front door, bent at one corner where it had caught on the carpet. It was greasy at the edges from someone's hand and smelled faintly of my father's cologne, the one he wore to weddings and court offices and any meeting where he needed to appear more expensive than the room. I stood over it for a moment before picking it up. The hallway in my flat was cold. Rain tapped once against the kitchen window and stopped. My phone lit up with a message from Leila and went dark before I opened it. I took the envelope to the table, used a butter knife to slit the top, and tipped the contents out in one stack. Revised guarantee. Supplemental consent form. Cover note with no greeting. Only one sentence in my father's hand. Signatures aligned, return immediately. The phrase made no sense until I turned the second page. My name was already there. Not a convincing version. Too slow on the last letter. The tail on the first initial lifted when mine usually pressed down. But good enough to travel if no one looked closely and good enough to tell me what he thought the next hour required. Not persuasion. Completion. I sat very still with the page in front of me. There are moments when anger feels hot. This wasn't one of them. It was cleaner than that. The kind of cold that arranges objects. I laid the pages flat, took photographs in daylight by the window, then closer photographs of the signature line, the indent of the pen stroke, the date field. I photographed the envelope, the handwritten note, the return instructions. Then I put everything back in order and emailed the images to Mrs. Vale. Subject line, forged signature on restructuring documents. She replied in 4 minutes. Do not contact him first. Preserve originals, call now. I called. She answered on the first ring. Have you touched the signature page directly? Yes. Fine. Stop now, I'm copying in counsel. There was no room for emotion in her voice. That helped. Within 20 minutes, I had spoken to a solicitor she recommended, dictated a factual statement, and signed an authorization for him to notify the bank formally that any signature purporting to be mine on the restructuring packet was unauthorized. He told me to keep my sentences short and my memory exact. When did you receive it? Approximately 8:10. How do you know it came from your father? The envelope smells like his cologne, contains his handwritten note, and includes revised versions of documents he previously attempted to have me sign in person. Do not say attempted unless asked for intent. He said, say presented, unauthorized, received, photographed, preserved. Law shaved the blood off language and left it standing. By noon, the accounts connected to the restructuring were frozen pending review. The email confirming it landed while I was still in the solicitor's waiting room. Plain subject line, internal compliance action. I read it once, then again. The words did not look dramatic enough for what they meant. No sirens, no men in suits, just a pause inserted into the machinery my father had been trying to set in motion around me. This was the damage I could live with. Not because it was small, because it was clean. I drove to my father's house before he could hear it from someone else. I told myself I was going for Leila. That was true. It was not the whole truth. Some quieter part of me still wanted to stand in front of him once, before calls and letters and third parties widened the distance further, and say the thing plainly where he could not claim confusion. Maybe children of men like him always keep one foolish thread. Not hope exactly. Procedure. A last direct notice. His house looked overkept from the outside. Freshly trimmed hedge, brass number polished, curtains drawn back evenly. Inside, the dining room smelled of citrus polish and stale coffee. He was there with invoices spread under the fruit bowl, reading glasses low on his nose, his phone face down beside an untouched pair. He looked up as I entered and understood at once. Not the trust, not yet, but he knew I had moved first. Leila was standing in the doorway to the hall with a backpack at her feet. School bag replaced by something larger. Navy canvas. Zipper half open. She had packed in a hurry, but not in panic. That detail steadied me. My father took off his glasses and folded them with both hands. What did you do? I closed the dining room door behind me. I corrected something. His eyes flicked once to Leila's bag and then back to me. The room held three kinds of silence at once. His, mine, hers. Did the bank call you already? I asked. No. They will. He pushed his chair back and stood. Not fast. The old controlled version, again. The one he thought made him look larger. Did you call strangers on your own blood? The phrase almost sounded biblical in his mouth. He liked his grievances formal. I called the truth by its name. I said, his face changed then. Not with shock. With injury that wanted witnesses. You have no idea what exposure you've created. You forged my signature. I corrected a delay. Leila shifted in the doorway. The backpack straps brushed the skirting board with a dry sound. I said, you used her tuition? That landed harder than the forgery. His eyes moved toward her without turning his head. This doesn't concern her. She said, it was my money. He looked back at me. You dragged her into this. I almost answered. Instead, I watched his hand flatten against the table edge. Strong hand. Veins raised. The hand that had signed returned to sender across my envelopes. The hand that had written signatures aligned in the margin of a forged packet. He was still doing it now, rewriting the scene while all the evidence stood in the room. She's coming with me, I said. He gave a small, disbelieving smile. On what authority? It was such a perfect question that for a second I saw the whole family architecture inside it. Not whether she wanted to go. Not whether she was safe. Authority. Whose permission made movement legal? Leila answered before I could. I'm 18. No tremora, no drama. Just fact. He looked at her then, fully, and something in his face thinned. Not grief. Calculation adjusting. He could stop a child. He could not stop a witness without changing categories. You think you understand what he's doing? He asked her. She said nothing. He will turn one problem into 10. Still, she said nothing. That quiet belonged to our grandmother. I recognized it. The kind that does not argue because the inventory has already been taken. My father looked back at me, and for the first time I could see him trying to locate the person he thought fear had built. The useful one. The one who reached for the tray when called. The one who lowered their eyes and filled the urn and signed later, in private, after the sharpness passed. He could not find that person quickly enough. Leila bent, picked up the backpack, and walked past him without asking permission. He did not touch her. That was the moment I knew the old version was finished. Not when the accounts froze. Not when I made the report here. In the dining room, under the light fixture my mother had once chosen, with the fruit bowl between unpaid invoices and my sister's empty account. At the front door, I turned back once. He was still standing by the table, one hand on the wood. The invoices opened under his fingers like a map he had followed too far. You did this, he said. Maybe he meant the freeze. Maybe he meant the leaving. Maybe he meant the fact that paper had finally started answering for him. I did not ask. Leila stepped out into the cold first. I followed and pulled the door shut behind us. The sound was smaller than I expected. Still final. Within a week, my father contested the trust. The papers arrived in a cream envelope thicker than the forged packet had been. This time through proper channels, with stamped copies and indexed tabs and a cover letter that made accusations sound civilized. I opened them at my kitchen table while Leila slept on the sofa under my spare blanket, one arm over her face against the morning light. My father's claim was simple in structure and filthy in effect. He said my grandmother had been confused. He said she had been isolated near the end. He said she had been manipulated by people with access and influence. The trust, according to his filing, reflected diminished capacity and undue pressure. He requested urgent review, preservation orders, disclosure of communications. The language stayed smooth while it dragged a dead woman into a room she could not enter to defend herself. He filed through a probate litigator with a silk tie and a voice trained for sympathy. I met him only once in person, across a conference table, but I heard him before I saw him. Soft consonants. Pity arranged like cutlery. He spoke of family concern and late-life vulnerability while sliding folders toward my solicitor as though we were discussing upholstery rather than my grandmother's mind. Suddenly, the private letters became evidence folders. Each page that had smelled faintly of her perfume now wore exhibit stickers. Her handwriting was enlarged and inserted behind divider tabs. My mother's name appeared in affidavits from people who had barely known her. One neighbor from years back swore my grandmother had never properly recovered after the loss. A former business acquaintance said she had become suspicious in later life. My father's lawyer used that word twice, suspicious, as if caution in the presence of a man. Like my father, were pathology instead of pattern recognition. I sat through the first procedural meeting with my hands folded tight enough to leave crescent marks in my palms. Leila was not there. I had left her with my aunt that morning. I wanted at least one person in the family out of the fluorescent wash of it. The waiting area outside probate looked like every courthouse waiting area I had ever feared in advance and forgotten immediately after. Hard chairs bolted in rows. A water cooler with paper cups bending under their own weight. Lights that made everyone look tired before anything had begun. My aunt sat beside me with a paper cup of machine coffee gone cold. She wore the same black coat she had worn to the memorial lunch, the hem slightly frayed where it brushed her ankles. Her handbag was open on her lap, tissues and receipts visible inside. But she sat very still, one hand over the coffee lid as if warmth might return by discipline. For a while, we watched people come and go. A man arguing quietly into his phone near the elevators. A woman in a red scarf reading the same page of a file without turning it. Two lawyers passing with boxers that looked too heavy for paper. Then my aunt said, "Your grandmother did not fear poverty." I turned to her. She kept her eyes on the vending machine across the corridor. She feared repetition. The second hand on the courthouse clock clicked once above us. Then again, she had known poor. My aunt said poor was work. Poor was mending hems at midnight. Poor was selling fabric by the half meter and walking home in the rain. She could do poor. What she could not bear was watching the same house become the same house twice. I did not interrupt. She watched her father become his own father by inches. She said, "Not all at once." That would have been easier to name. First, the need to be obeyed. Then the borrowing with no witnesses. Then the debt kept behind closed doors. Then the family image polished while the floor rotted underneath. A bailiff opened a courtroom door down the hall. Names were called. Shoes clicked. My aunt waited until the door shut again. She built the trust because she knew you had inherited the habit of staying. She said, "That landed harder than anything in the filing had." My grandmother had seen it. Not just my father's appetite. Mine too. The carefulness, the urge to be useful, the way I stood in doorways waiting to be told where to carry the weight. My aunt finally looked at me then, and for the first time since the memorial, I saw the grief under her discipline. She worried less about him using you once, she said, than about you offering yourself forever. I looked down at the cold coffee in her hand. The lid had bowed inward slightly where her thumb rested. I thought of all the years I had treated endurance as a virtue because it looked quieter than surrender. My solicitor came out of the conference room with a file against her chest. She was younger than my father's lawyer and less ornamental. No silk tie, no sorrowful eyebrows. Just a navy suit, sharp notes, and a way of speaking that made sentiment wait its turn. "We need a decision," she said. Inside the small consultation room, she laid out the options with the same flat care Mrs. Vale used when facts were about to bite. My father's case depended on atmosphere, unless we chose to cut the structure underneath it. He was implying confusion, isolation, manipulation. The letters alone could be argued over. Their warmth could be turned into weakness. Her distrust could be framed as decline. If we introduced the intercepted envelopes and the records of the returned mail, the shape changed. Then there was a documented pattern of interference. Intentional interception, concealment. A direct reason my grandmother had rerouted communication and tightened terms. "It will gut his case," my solicitor said. She opened a side file and showed me copies. The 3 envelopes from his drawer, my name on the front, returned to sender in his handwriting. Not at this address. The sliced one taped shut again. Small things, ordinary things. That was what made them so complete. Nothing theatrical, just proof of a man standing in front of a door and pretending no one lived behind it. My solicitor continued. "It will also stain him publicly. Relatives will talk. Suppliers may hear. If there is any path back to private settlement, this narrows it. Private settlement," the phrase sat there like a coat from another season. "And if we don't," I asked. She met my eyes. "Then he keeps room to suggest your grandmother didn't know her own mind." The room went very quiet after that. Through the thin wall, I could hear a copier running in bursts. Somewhere farther off, a cart squeaked over tile. I looked at the clock above the door. White face, black hands. The second hand clicked into each mark with a tiny mechanical certainty. Family reputation. That old tax? Even now, after the forged signature, after Leila's account, after the returned letters, and the second mortgage and the dead woman's townhouse used as leverage. Some part of me still flinched at being the one who would make the hidden thing legible. I could already hear certain relatives. Why expose him like that? Why not settle quietly? Why make her memory part of this? But that was the trick, wasn't it? He had already made her memory part of this. He had put her judgment on trial because he thought I would still protect his face before I defended her mind. I looked at the copied envelopes again, then at my grandmother's letters in their evidence sleeves, then at my aunt, who had not come into the room but sat visible through the glass panel outside, coffee still in her hand, waiting without intruding. She had carried silence at the memorial to get me to this point, not to keep me in it forever. My loyalty shifted there, not loudly, not like a knife, more like a compass, finally giving up on a false north. File everything, I said. My solicitor did not nod approval. She just wrote it down. All of it, she asked. All of it. The second hand clicked once more. She gathered the envelopes, the mail records, the affidavit draft from Mrs. Vale, and my statement about finding the letters in my father's drawer. Paper moved, tabs closed. The shape of the case changed under her hands. When I left the room, my aunt stood. Her coffee had gone untouched and cold. She searched my face for a second, then seemed to understand without asking. You chose her, she said quietly. I had not known that was the choice until then. But she was right. The court filing broke his challenge. The restructuring freeze held. The tax problem surfaced. After that, events moved with the kind of speed that feels slow only on paper. Meetings, notices, inventories, evaluation that cut the hall down into market terms and ignored what had happened under its chandeliers for 3 decades. I signed witness statements. Leila enrolled for the next term from my flat, using my table and my Wi-Fi and one of my grandmother's old pens. My aunt kept saying she was managing, which in her language meant she was not. My brother stopped calling entirely. Then the auction date came through. A clear weekday morning in early autumn. Sharp light, no rain. The kind of weather that made public ruin feel indecent, as if the sky should at least have had the manners to cloud over. The hall's sign was still up when I arrived, 2 letters dim as always. The row of shops below had opened as usual. Pharmacy, tailor, the pawn shop owner smoking by his shutter before fully lifting it. In the lobby, visible through the glass, the carpet still carried a line of silver glitter from the last wedding. No one had managed to vacuum it all out. It ran from the ballroom doors to the base of the stairs, like a little vein of denial. My father stood near the entrance in his dark coat, shoulders squared as if posture might count as capital. One hand in his pocket, one bare. He watched every arriving car with the same measuring look, and I understood at once what part of him still believed, that I might step out and save him at the last minute. Not the business. Him I parked half a block away and walked back with my solicitor. The air smelled of cold stone and diesel. She carried a leather folio. I carried nothing visible except 3 sealed envelopes, their paper edges pressed lightly against my palm. I had not slept much the night before. Not because I was unsure of the plan, because some smaller, more humiliating part of me had still pictured the other version. I arrive. He looks relieved instead of proud. The staff are paid. The hall survives. He says, at last, that I was right. He says my grandmother would have been proud. He thanks me in front of witnesses. It was a childish picture. Polished, efficient, useless. The real mourning had clipboards in it. An insolvency administrator stood near the foyer with 2 assistants and a cardboard archive box. A printed notice was taped inside the glass doors. Interested parties clustered in small knots on the pavement, speaking in low voices. A man in a camel coat held a bid paddle at his side and looked bored already. 2 women from a catering group peered into the lobby and whispered about the ceiling height. My father saw me and straightened, though he had already been standing straight. For 1 second, his face shifted into something almost like relief. It vanished when he saw who I had come with and what I was not carrying. No paddle, no banker, no dramatic rescue, just paper. We walked past him first, not rudely, not quickly, just without stopping. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of old flowers and furniture polish. The glitter line on the carpet flashed under the overhead lights each time someone crossed it. At the reception desk, the insolvency administrator opened his file and asked for my name. My solicitor spoke before I did. We have 3 deliveries to lodge. He held out his hand. The first sealed envelope went to him. Inside were funds designated to cover the oldest unpaid wages for the kitchen staff. Routed through the trust under the family hardship clause my grandmother had written, not enough to make the hall whole. Enough to keep the first people my father had used from carrying his deepest arrears into their own kitchens. The head chef, the pastry woman, the dishwasher, others whose names never appeared in speeches about legacy. The administrator glanced at the covering letter, then at me. His expression did not change much, but his tone did. These funds bypass ownership. He said, yes. I said, he understood the sentence under that one. The second envelope was for Leila's university. Proof of payment instructions and protected tuition transfer, prepared with more care than any school form deserved. My solicitor had arranged direct remittance. No family handling, no temporary borrowing, no wedding season promises. The third was addressed to my aunt. Settlement documents clearing the medical debt she had hidden behind managing. She had tried to refuse at first, then she had cried in my kitchen while peeling oranges and said she would accept it only if no one made a scene. So I made sure no scene could touch it. None of the envelopes passed through my father's hands. That was the point. Outside the glass, I saw him realize it in stages. First confusion, then insult, then the harder thing. The administrator signed one receipt and handed it to my solicitor. The box on the desk still smelled faintly of fresh cardboard. Behind him, the ballroom door stood open. I could see one corner of the parquet floor and the lower edge of a chandelier catching morning light. Empty room, full memory. I thought of my grandmother teaching me to fold napkins there when I was 10. Press the linen flat, corners exact. A clean square is a kind of respect, she used to say. Do it once, do it right. I had not understood then that she was not talking only about napkins. We stepped back onto the pavement. My father came after us at once, though he kept his pace measured for the bystanders. He would not give them a spectacle unless it served him. Up close, his face looked older than it had even a month earlier, not softer. Thinner around the mouth. The dark coat hung correctly. That was the sort of detail he always preserved. Can we speak? He asked. My solicitor moved half a step away but stayed within sight. A courtesy. Also a record. My father stopped just short of the curb. Cars passed behind me in brief silver flashes. From somewhere down the block came the hiss of a bus kneeling to let passengers off. Was humiliating me worth it? He asked, almost calmly. If anyone else had heard only the tone, they might have thought he was asking about pain. He was asking about hierarchy, about whether I had enjoyed crossing him in public, whether the witnesses had been the point. I looked past him through the glass doors at the ballroom. In daylight, it seemed smaller. The chandeliers were off. A stack of folded chairs sat by the far wall. On one table in the corner, someone had left a roll of gold ribbon, abandoned mid-pack down. For a second, I could almost see my grandmother there in her work shoes, turning napkins into clean squares, checking place settings with 2 fingers, building beauty inside a business hard enough to survive men. Then I looked back at him. I didn't come to watch you fall. I said, I came to stop falling with you. He took that in without blinking. You think you're better than your family now. No, I said. I think I finally stopped confusing help with surrender. That was the closest I had ever come to saying the whole thing to his face. Even then, I only gave him the peace he had earned. Behind him, more bidders were arriving. A woman in a cream coat, 2 men with measuring eyes, and no history in the building. The auctioneer stepped out of a van with a clipboard and looked at his watch. My father glanced back toward the entrance once, then at me again. Maybe some last part of him still expected revision. A softer sentence, a delayed check. The old reflex returning to save the room, it did not come. I stepped away first. My solicitor fell into stride beside me. We walked back toward my car while voices gathered behind us near the doors. I did not turn around when the auctioneer called for attention. I did not wait for the first bid. I did not need to hear a number put to the place where my grandmother had worked half her life. Mercy had already gone where it needed to go, not to ownership, not to pride, to wages, to tuition, to debt that had never belonged to the person carrying it. Months later, Leila and I stood in a small storefront with a fogged front window and a counter that still smelled like fresh paint. The place had once been a dry cleaner. You could still see the outline on the wall where the old price board had hung. We had stripped the room back to plaster, patched what we could afford to patch, and left the rest honest. One clean room, a narrow prep space behind it, 4 small tables by the window, mismatched chairs bought from a cafe that had closed without ceremony. Morning light came in pale and low, turning the steam on the glass silver. In the back, the head chef from the old hall stood over a stock pot with one of my grandmother's notebooks propped open on a flour tin. He was testing lentil soup and pretending not to be nervous. He had the same heavy watch on his wrist, the same habit of tasting with his eyes half closed. The first spoonful had too much cumin. The second was closer. By the third, he gave one short nod and wrote a correction in the margin beside my grandmother's original line. Leila was at the counter counting change into the till drawer in stacks of 5. Her hair was tied up with a pencil. She had started doing that when she studied late. The scarf was folded on the shelf below the register now. Cream with green leaves, kept near but not on display. She had gone back to university. Slowly, properly. Fees paid directly. No empty account waiting to be discovered. We did not rebuild the empire. That was never really on the table. Not once the fantasy burned off. We took one room with a clean lease and enough light to see dirt before it became habit. We hired carefully, paid on time, bought fewer chairs than we wanted, used smaller pans than the old hall would have tolerated. We sold soup, flatbread to stews, tea, and 3 desserts on good days. Honest work looked less impressive from the street. It also let me sleep. Outside, above the fogged window, the new sign carried my grandmother's maiden name, not the married one. Not the family business name my father had polished until it meant him more than anyone else. Her own. The one he had almost erased by accident simply by never saying it. The first morning before opening, I unlocked the front, switched on the lights, and stood in the quiet with the key still warm in my hand. The fridge motor kicked on behind the counter. A delivery van rattled past. Somewhere farther down the block, someone dragged a metal shutter halfway up. I took the last letter from my coat pocket. I had carried it for weeks without opening it. Not out of fear exactly, out of timing. The other letters had been instructions while the floor was still moving. This one felt like something I should not read until I had a room of my own to stand in. The paper was softer at the folds than the others. I knew her handwriting before the page opened fully. Money cannot heal humiliation, she wrote, but it can shorten the distance between a person and a door. I rested the letter against the till and kept reading. She wrote that people often mistake endurance for devotion because the two can wear the same face at family tables. She wrote that leaving late is still leaving. She wrote that if I was reading this in a small place rather than a grand one, she would be glad, because a clean threshold matters more than a large room full of owed favors. Then came the line that changed the scale of everything that had happened. You were never hard to love. You were only expensive for the wrong man to control. I read it once, then again slower. Outside, someone laughed on the pavement. In the back, the head chef banged a lid against a pot and muttered at himself. Leila was still upstairs in the tiny office we had built out of plasterboard, checking opening stock against invoices. The room kept going while the sentence stayed still. All those years, I had moved around my father like a child, trying not to cost too much. Too much trouble. Too much opinion. Too much delay. Too much dignity at the wrong moment. Useful enough to keep, never expensive enough to treat carefully. My grandmother had seen the arithmetic for what it was. I folded the letter once, then once again, and placed it in the till beneath the spare key. Not framed, not displayed, kept where working hands could reach it. By then the practical wreckage had mostly settled into its new shapes. The trust stood. My father's challenge failed. The hall was gone to another owner who turned it into something blander and brighter. My brother sent one message about misunderstandings, and then none after I did not respond. My aunt's debt was cleared. She visited twice a week and complained that our tea glasses were too thick, which meant she was comfortable enough to be herself again. As for my father, he became a voice that traveled through other people first. A cousin saying he was managing, a supplier mentioning he had asked around, a family friend reporting he looked tired. The kind of information meant to test whether guilt still had a live wire into me. Sometimes it did. That was the last part to admit. The practical crisis can end before the body gets the memo. Some mornings, hearing a man with his cadence on the street outside was enough to make my shoulders tense before thought arrived. Some nights, I still drafted conversations with him in my head and never had them. Not reconciliations, just edits. Sentences I wished I had said better. Questions I should have asked sooner. Old children still tidy impossible rooms. Then, one quiet afternoon between lunch and the evening prep, my phone rang from a number I did not know. I was wiping down the counter. Leila was in the back labeling takeaway containers. The head chef was arguing with a supplier about coriander quality. The whole shop smelled like lentils, warm yeast, and fresh paint that had not fully left the woodwork. I looked at the screen. No name. Just a number. Still, I knew. My hand did not shake. That surprised me more than the call itself. I let it ring while I stood there with the cloth in my hand and the till drawer half open. The sound filled the small shop, then stopped. Screen dark. I did not block it. I did not answer it. Some endings are not speeches. They are unanswered things. Leila came out from the back and looked at me once, then at the phone, then away. She did not ask. She picked up the cloth from beside me and finished the counter edge I had missed. At closing, I counted the till and felt the folded letter beneath the spare key. Not a weapon, not revenge. Not even rescue, not really. Permission. That was closer. My grandmother had not hidden money to spring a surprise on my father. She had built time, distance, paper walls, a door. The million mattered less than I thought it would. What stayed was smaller and harder to argue with. A line in her hand. A room paid for honestly. My sister upstairs studying between customers. Soup from a notebook no one could refinance. The sign outside carrying the right name at last. My father called me a disgrace because he thought my worth was whatever he could corner, spend, or shame. My grandmother left the trust because she had already measured me another way. If you stayed with me this far, tell me where you would have drawn the line. And tell me which city you watched from.